Kitten by Mmartinv. The kitten was covered in dried blood when I found her, barely the size of my hand. The trembling thing tottered its way toward me in fits and stops. She moved like a broken wind-up toy. It had been years since I had a farm cat, so the appearance of the mewing trespasser was a mystery. The farm was far enough from town that I never saw a stray animal. There were just too many predators between me and civilization. Someone must have dumped a pregnant female near the farm, I thought. I searched for others in the litter while holding the shaking kitten under my arm. The cat had been living under a half-empty grain bag, and the mother was nowhere to be seen. Neither were any littermates, only a bloody circle of dirt with tufts of fur and bits of bone let me know that a cat had been there. "Looks like we're on our own," I told the shaking kitten as I placed it under my coat to keep it warm. We were in the first few weeks of fall, and the cold of the north was making itself known. I crunched my way through the frost to the house and kicked off my boots on the porch. The kitten cried with every breath. I was sure it needed to eat. I remembered an old conversation about how sheep milk wasn't suitable for cats, so I placed the kitten in my warming box and searched for emergency formula recipes. I found a recipe that I had the ingredients to make and set to work, mixing a can of evaporated milk, egg yolk, and a couple of tablespoons of Caro syrup. I didn't have a bottle that would work for the kitten, but there were a few syringes around from vaccinating the sheep. I unwrapped a syringe, filled it with the emergency formula, and pulled my little patient from her box. She took to milk quickly, and I began to wonder where she was putting it all as I filled the syringe over and over with the custard-like formula. After the third syringe, I gently squeezed the kitten's tummy, but it didn't feel full. I continued feeding her, and I studied her as she ate. The kitten's paws were massive for its size, almost clownish, and every paw had a sixth toe. Most of the kitten's coat was matted with blood, but rich chocolate fur was partially visible on her tummy. I smiled as I watched the kitten's sapphire eyes droop contentedly. And then I noticed her teeth. An extra set of canines protruded from the top and bottom of the kitten's mouth, on both sides. "That's creepy," I said as I laid her in the cardboard box. "You're a creepy little kitty," I said with a sing-song to her as I rubbed her head. It took a couple of hours to finish up the chores, and by the time I finished, the veterinarian's office was open. The doc kept some time available in the morning for walk-ins, so it wasn't long until Carol, the veterinarian assistant, had washed the blood off the cat. The kitten was cuddling up against my palm when Doc Weller pushed his way into the exam room with a cup of coffee.
"Are you picking up strays again?"
Doc asked as a greeting. I knew Doc Weller before he was a doctor. We met in middle school when my dad moved us north from Tennessee to help on my uncle's farm. I was the only middle schooler in class with a twang in my voice, but Weller didn't care, and that made all the difference. "You're never gonna stop teasing me about those possums, are you?" I said as I handed the kitten over.
"Never,"
he said as he began poking at the chocolate fur ball. "Well, possums eat ticks, so it was basically a community service."
"Sure. That must be why you named them."
My only reply was a raised eyebrow.
"Those teeth are something else,"
Doc said after he jerked his hand back. I could see blood beginning to well up on Doc's callous finger.
"Those second sets of canines have an edge to them. But she looks healthy."
Doc set the kitten down on the exam table.
"You won't have trouble getting this one adopted. Those emo Wiccan kids would love her."
Would they?
"Absolutely. Bill, my youngest, is dating one of those. He brought her home from college last weekend. She spent all Saturday night witnessing the moon and weeping. Seems like we're getting more of that type all the time around here.
I laughed at his annoyance. Not all kids want to freeze their asses off hiding in the middle of a pasture drinking Coors Light. I said this, knowing perfectly well that Doc and I spent many teenage nights drinking his dad's beer in the middle of my uncle's pasture.
I don't see why not. It builds character and a healthy respect for watching where you step.
I chuckled, thinking about how many nights of underage drinking ended in scraping cow shit off of school shoes. I'm thinking about keeping her around the farm, I said, as Doc transferred the kitten to her cardboard box.
In that case, let me get the first round of vaccinations in her. And I'll send you home with some formula, dewormer, and a flea and tick treatment. You got a name for her? Something like Fang or...
Doc looked down, surprised as the kitten licked at the blood seeping from his finger.
Or Vampirella,
he said with a scowl, and pulled his hand away from the kitten's tongue. I was thinking Muffin.
Blood Muffin,
Doc said with a wink. That's disturbing.
The wink or the name?
Both, I said as I stretched Muffin out on the exam table so Doc could administer the shots. It will be nice to have a cat I can witness the moon with. Doc Weller eyed me menacingly as he uncapped his syringe. It would be a week before the kitten could try solid food, so when we got back to the farm, I made some formula and fed the little beast until her tummy started to bulge. I swear I put 3 bottles worth in her, which was surprising because the bottle was larger than she was. I didn't spend too much time thinking about it, because I had a few acres of fence that needed mending and not enough hours in the day. We were halfway through lambing season, and it seemed that every time I turned around that a ewe would drop twins in the freezing cold and walk away from one of them. I tried my best to keep the expecting mothers inside, but I would find myself out in the middle of the frozen pasture searching for newborns most nights. It was the morning after Halloween when I found the lamb. He was half dead when I got him inside. Covered in placenta, it was apparent his mother dropped him and walked away. It was lucky the ravens didn't get him. I have a warming box on my back porch, so I placed the lamb in it and then searched my freezer for bags of colostrum. The lamb didn't have the energy to move, and I knew I would have to tube feed him. As I worked over the lamb, Muffin watched. Muffin didn't get close at first, but it was obvious she was paying attention to the lamb. It wasn't too long ago that I had to do something like this for you. Why is it so hard to keep you little buggers alive? I joked as I gently slid the tube down the lamb's throat. I chatted to Muffin while she sniffed at the limp form in my arms. When they're newborns like this and they haven't eaten, it's best just to tube feed them if they seem weak. It helps warm them up and they don't have to work much to get the calories they need. Of course, you have to be careful not to get the tube in their windpipe. Milk in the lungs would be no help at all. Muffin huffed at me and blinked slowly. I had the odd feeling that Muffin truly understood what I was saying. Too many hours alone on a farm will do that. After checking that the tube was in the right spot, I fed the lamb a bag and a half of colostrum while Muffin watched. She watched the whole thing. I felt a little odd about her unblinking attention. It was like having a stoic supervisor watching you work. After I fed the lamb, Muffin sat next to the warming box with a curious expression on her furry chocolate face. You look like you're thinking pretty hard, I said as I sat and scratched Muffin's back. It's our job to keep these little critters alive, or at least try to. This property isn't the safest area for sheep farming. It's just the one I could afford. The truth of it is, all the predators around here eat sheep. Ravens, vultures, coyotes, wolves, foxes. I thought for a moment and continued. Bears, dogs, eagles, bobcats, mountain lions. Geez, I did not pick the right place for a sheep farm. Muffin nuzzled my hand, and I gave her more scratches under the chin. "Feel free to hunt any of those predators, you little tiger," I said with a chuckle as Muffin purred and nuzzled into my chest. The following weeks went by smoothly. I named our new sheep Ed, and after a few days I put him in the barn with the other bottle-fed lambs. Muffin seemed oddly fascinated with the little guy, and I would find her occasionally watching the lamb as it bucked and played in the barn with its new friends. After Ed was big enough to be let out into the pasture, Muffin started disappearing into the wooded area around the farm for hours at a time. At first I was worried about her, but she showed up for meals and bed, so I just accepted it and got on with my chores after a while. It was Saturday morning, and something was wrong. Muffin wound her long form in between my legs as I stood on the back porch drinking coffee and trying to convince myself that I didn't want to go back to bed. Then I noticed it. The air was too still. Farms are noisy places. Coyotes howl, crickets chirp, and birds make all sorts of ungodly noises. At least they did. I walked back into the house, grabbed my coat, and placed my coffee mug in the sink. When I stepped back out, the feeling of wrongness had gone away, and I couldn't understand why 1 minute was so different from the next. Then I heard a scratching at the door. I turned, and Muffin sat behind the sliding glass door. She must have gotten stuck in the house when I went back in for my coat. I opened the door, and Muffin walked onto the porch. And the world stopped making noise. No birds, no bugs, and no coyotes. Only the sheep were making noise, which figures because sheep are too dumb to take a hint. The farm and the surrounding woods were silent until I shooed Muffin back into the house. Who knows what Muffin thought as I carried her into the house. I tested my hypothesis by shutting her inside and then letting her out, only to scoop her back up and shut her indoors again. She looked at me with her head tilted to one side in confusion, but I was generous with the treats, and that seemed to be all that was important. I couldn't quite grasp what I had just witnessed. Did my kitten frighten all the animals around the farm? It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? And when had I last seen a raven or heard a coyote? In the end, I decided to ignore it. I felt like I was ignoring lots of little things lately, but I couldn't do anything about it one way or the other, so what was the point? That's what I kept telling myself, anyway. The farm is small. I get my income mainly from wool and a few other odd jobs I can piece together throughout the year. I might make some deliveries or rake hay for a little extra income. One of my odd jobs is keeping an eye on the neighboring farm. The Lightbrook cornfield is 2,000 acres and millions of dollars worth of machinery and chemicals. Terry, the farm manager, paid me a small amount every month to keep an eye on the place, since I was just across the road and in my pasture well past dark most nights. This night was no different. The holidays had come and gone, and now the weather was just brutal, without anything festive to look forward to. Inches of soft snow layered over a thick coat of ice, turning my walk to the barn into an exciting game of will I fall on my ass? While lying in the snow after my second fall, I noticed a floodlight go out above the neighbor's farm, and then I heard the gunshot. Without bothering to stand, I pulled out my cell phone and called Terry. I told him what I saw as I lay in the powder. Terry told me to stay safe and contact the sheriff's department. While I was on the phone with the sheriff's department, 2 more lights went out, with 2 more gunshots, and then the roar of an engine. In the moonlight, I could make out a full-sized pickup pulling into the neighbor's farm. The truck backed up to the long cylindrical form of an ammonia tank, and before I knew it, they were driving away with the tank hitched behind them. A minute or 2 passed, and then 2 sheriff's cars sped by with their sirens and lights. I hauled myself out of the snow and trudged carefully back to the house. An hour later, I was visited by Deputy Fahey. Fahey was a dork in high school, all spindly legs and elbows with a goofy, open smile that pissed off bullies and charmed girls. We were in different grades, but we played football together. I invited him into the house for coffee. Muffin wound herself around his legs.
"A couple of tweakers,"
Fahey stated as he stretched at my kitchen table.
"It might have been the Donnelly brothers. Don't go spreading that around. We don't know for sure yet. The truck took the curve off the junction too fast and rolled. 2 in the cab, legged it into the timber, but the crash released a thick cloud of ammonia, and we couldn't follow them."
After taking my statement, Fahey reached down and scratched Muffin's ears.
"What's your cat's name?"
"Muffin," I replied as I topped off Fahey's thermos.
"I don't ever think I've seen a chocolate-colored cat before. Dang, she's pretty."
Muffin purred loud enough to shake the walls, but her joy was short-lived. Fahey's radio squawked, and I walked him back to his car.
"They may still be around, so lock your doors and give a call if you notice anything,"
Fahey said as Muffin trotted along beside him. Fahey folded his long frame into his car and gave Muffin another scratch.
"If you do call, we won't be too far. The sheriff has us all combing the back roads for those 2 idiots."
Muffin trotted back to me and sat down, gazing up at Fahey and purring contentedly.
"Later, Mar. Thanks for the coffee." "Nice to meet you, Muffin,"
Fahey called as he drove away. Muffin watched him go. "He's a happily married man, Muffin." Muffin stopped purring. "I can't believe that dork charmed my cat," I murmured to myself. Muffin chuffed at me and looked grumpy as she stalked back into the house. I couldn't help laughing at her. Jokingly, I said, "If anyone tries to break into the house, you have my permission to give them the same treatment that you give the ravens. And then I'll tell Fahey what a good job you did. I'm sure he'd be impressed." Muffin just raised her chin in distaste and walked away. Strangely enough, I fell right to sleep. A full day of trudging through the snow and mending fences will do that. The brandy I put in my coffee probably helped too. The sound of glass shattering woke me up. I hadn't been letting Muffin sleep in bed with me, but she usually found her way next to my knees at some point each night. She hopped off the bed and walked to the door. A stream of cold air twisted its way into the bedroom, and I knew someone else was in my home. Muffin patted her way into the hall, while I silently slid out of bed. I found my pants crumpled on the floor and pulled them on while listening behind the bedroom door. Checking my pockets, I found my truck keys and wallet, but no phone. The phone was in the living room, charging. I didn't have anything to attack an intruder. I'm not a gun guy. I'm a keep the suicide machines out of the house in case I have a bad day kind of guy. After scanning the bedroom, I grabbed a spray-on deodorant from the dresser as an impromptu can of mace. The house is small, with 2 bedrooms. I used the second bedroom as an office, and that is where the whispered voices came from. I heard filing cabinet drawers open and papers fall to the floor. Silently, I plucked my phone from its charger. After slipping into my boots, I exited the house. I ran from my truck, each step crunching through the layer of powder and ice. Once inside, I called the police and drove up the road just far enough to watch the farm without being in the way. In moments, flashing lights descended on my home.
No one's there.
Fahey said, as he sat in the passenger seat and warmed his hands on my heater vents. It only took you 5 minutes to get here, I said, a note of disbelief coloring the statement.
They were there, and they haven't been gone for long.
Fahey reassured me.
The blood hasn't even dried yet.
Blood?
Did you shoot one of them?
Fahey said as he scanned me for a gun. I don't own a gun. I raised the can of body spray from its spot in the cup holder. My big plan was spraying them in the face with this crap.
They must have gotten in a fight or something. It wouldn't be the first time two druggies tried to kill each other over something stupid.
How bad is it?
There's blood all over your house and out the back door. I tracked it to the pasture, and there was a big circle of blood where it looked like there was a fight. Then, nothing.
Not creepy at all, I deadpanned. Guess I should get this over with, I said, and stepped out of my truck.
You ain't creepy. You won't believe half the stuff I've seen since the start of this job. Did you know we have a cult?
What? No.
Yeah, just past the Smith farm. They're on the other side of the timber you have to the east. I went out about 6 months ago when a school bus full of 8th graders saw a man in a hood and cloak cutting up a deer near the highway. I talked to the head cultist, or whatever he was, a goddamn buck.
Fahey chuckled. Buck the cultist. Jesus, Fahey, are you screwing with me?
Huh, not one little bit. Buck straight up told me they're doing some demon summoning spell, but he had a deer hunting license and was on his own land, so I couldn't do much other than look at him with my stern face.
Fahey showed me an example of his stern face. It was pretty much his regular face with a squint. I think that would be something I would keep to myself, I said, grinning at him.
Right. If you're going to summon a demon, don't tell anyone.
Fahey stopped a few feet from my front door.
Wait, did you mean my face? Are there demon summoning?
You want me to answer that?
Hey now,
Fahey said, with mock irritation. Our laughter died as we walked into my living room. Dime-sized splashes of blood spotted every surface. I stepped to my office without worrying about tracking through the blood. What was the point? I couldn't make it any worse. The office had been trampled. One of the bookcases had tipped over, and it looked like the file cabinet had been emptied onto the floor. Hordes of glistening red rolled slowly down the walls. Fahey coughed.
you should probably wear gloves when you sort through this. I'm sure those two idiots have a few diseases.
Dazed, I tracked the trail of blood covering my office, living room, kitchen, and back porch. Does this seem like a lot of blood to you? Shouldn't there be a body? I asked.
It's a puzzle.
Fahey's mouth hardened into a tight line.
Especially when you see the mess out back.
I pulled my chore coat on, and we followed the trail to the pasture. Jesus, I said, not able to grasp what I was seeing.
I know, right?
Fahey agreed. We stared at the circle of blood and gore in disbelief. It was about 6 meters in diameter. Flecks of bone and knots of hair were trampled into the snow. A scattering of teeth lay in the center. The deputy and I ran out of things to chat about. Fahey eventually broke the silence.
I'll be back out here in the morning with the sheriff. He'll want to see this. Try to get some sleep, Mar,
he said, and then headed to his cruiser while I wandered back into the bloody mess that was my home. Then, I remembered Muffin. I called for the kitten. There was no answer, so I poured some fresh water and food for Muffin and headed for the bedroom. I needed sleep. I didn't even pull off my boots or coat. I just crashed on my bed. It was still dark when the yowling woke me up. A low, moaning yowl pulled me from a dreamless sleep. A burning, shuddering feeling leadened my limbs, and my head felt full. It was too early for this, but I wiped the crud out of my eyes and forced myself to sit up. The yowl sounded painful and somehow everywhere. My conscience wouldn't let me ignore a hurt animal, even if my brain was too scrambled and sleep-deprived to realize what it was. I trudged outside, thankful that I already had on my work clothes. It was like the sound was coming from inside my head, but it got louder the closer I walked to the pasture. I kept walking. My boots crunched loudly in the frozen red snow. I was halfway to the circle when I heard a sheep bleating from a patch of knee-high scrub brush to my left. The lamb was laying on the ground, looking at something in the shrubs. "Ed?" I asked, confused. The yowling grew overwhelming, and I had to cradle my head in my hands. My eyes watered, and my head felt too full. I knelt down next to the lamb and shined my light under the patch of shrubs where Ed was staring. My trembling kitten looked back at me, face matted with blood, eyes glassy, drool hanging from her quivering lips. She whimpered at me, and it was obvious she was in pain. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, and continued to croon to her as I turned off my flashlight and pushed into the snow-covered shrubs. I sing-songed to her as I pried the branches away from her hiding spot. "It will be all right. It will be okay. We'll figure this out." I finally pushed enough branches away to get a hold of my scared little kitten. I shushed her, and I reached behind her front legs and pulled her up through the bramble. She was significantly bigger than she had been just hours before. Muffin's stomach was distended to the point that it resembled a volleyball. I cradled her gently with one arm and spoke softly to her as I hurried back to the house. We were almost to the fence when Muffin started to shudder and hack like she was working a giant hairball up from a deep echoing place inside herself. Suddenly, my little chocolate kitten went rigid. Her muscles tensed, and she began heaving and making a scraping sound deep within her throat. I didn't know what to do. I held Muffin as gently as I could, but the kitten spasmed and hacked so violently that I believed she would hurt herself. Things became all the more desperate as a purple glow emanated from Muffin's mouth. My heart hammered as the glow illuminated the flurries that fell silently around us. The light steadily intensified as Muffin used every muscle in her small frame to heave, hack, and strain. Then while I held her, she gave one more massive shudder. Muffin's mouth split at the jaw and unfolded until she looked as if a gramophone cone had been grafted to her small furry body. I was still holding my kitten. Somehow I hadn't dropped her. Somehow I hadn't run. Then the body of a man bubbled out of Muffin's gaping conical mouth and flopped onto the frozen ground. I stared at the body, but my mind would only allow me flashes of understanding. The man was whole, or intact, I should say. No pieces were missing, but furrows had been cut deep into the flesh. A membrane of mucus enveloped the bony and sickly form of a meth addict. A cracking, sucking sound echoed from around the pasture, and I looked down at the kitten in my arms, watching as her jaw folded back into place. Muffin looked up at me and mewed. She looked normal and smaller. Still fuller, like she ate a large meal, but less round, and her face looked normal, just like a cat. I compared the size of the grown man to that of my half-grown kitten, and part of my brain pleaded for this to be a dream, but I knew it wasn't. The cold was too biting to be anything but real. Muffin jumped out of my arms. She walked to the man on the ground, sniffed him, and wrinkled her nose. It was cute, and that shocked me more than I can say. She looked up at me expectantly. It took me a moment to realize Muffin wanted something from me. "Good job?" I said, my voice cracking and sounding more like a question than a statement. I knew I had to do better than that from Muffin's disappointed stare. "Good job," I said with more confidence. "You did a good job protecting the farm, and I'll have to tell Fahey what a good job you did." After a pause, I added, "There's new water in your bowl." Muffin seemed pleased. She turned and trotted happily back to the house. I stood near the body for a moment and then followed after her. Muffin would need me to open the sliding door. She is just a cat, after all. Salutations, dark passengers, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. I absolutely adore this one. I have a couple of dark chocolate furballs myself, and they both share similar personality traits to Muffin. Curious, understanding, indignant, loving, and a bit dangerous. I extend my deepest gratitude to Mmartinv for allowing me to share his story on my channel. I verily thank PA Nightmares and Big Daddy Stone for again joining me on the channel. A fervent thank you to Repulsive, myuu, The Dark Somnium, and Fesliyan Studios for the music that enhanced the story so wonderfully. Also, a major shout out to all of those who put their recordings on freesound.org for creators like myself to explore and use. I couldn't tell these stories the way I do without you all. Thank you. And for those of you who stuck around to the end, I have another experiment that PA Nightmares and I worked on together. Enjoy.
Hey now.
Hey now.
You're a creepy little kitty.
Hey now. Hey now.
Did you know we have a cult?